next speaker for today is Dr. Nico Avenant. Dr. Nico is a renowned small mammal ecologist whose experience is older than most of you here. I know the students, his experience is older than you. He has 30 years experience in this field. And Dr. Avenant has authored over 90 peer-reviewed papers, and he has supervised over 20 postgraduate students. Isn't that cool? Yeah, so today he'll be diving into essential skill of capture, mark, and release method, focusing on how these techniques are used to make informal decisions of mammals like mice, shrews, and others that are critical indicator species. By the end of Dr. Nico's talk, you should be able to, one, understand capture, mark, release method as it is used in mammal studies. Two, recognize the law in ecological research and monitoring. Three, learn the key principles, ethics, and techniques involved. And lastly, examine case studies on small mammals. Dr. Nico, the screen is all yours.
Sela and the Share Screen Africa team, thank you very much for the invitation. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful initiative that you're doing. I know the previous speakers has also mentioned that, and I'm really privileged to be part of this. So thank you for the opportunity to share my passion with you. I'm 30 years now at the National Museum studying small mammals. Um, but I also have a lot of experience on especially smaller carnivores, medium-sized carnivores, damage-causing animals, caracal, jackal, and so on. Um, yeah, but today's talk is about using capture mark release methods to inform ecological and environmental management studies. So, right, let's carry on. Although my speciality is on small mammals, and especially mice, shrews, and tsengies, and I'll mention exactly why that is so important for me. There's a lot of the things, underlying things about mark or catch, mark, release, recapture. Whether you work on a small mammal or larger mammal, it's basically the same. The reason why we're doing mark release is that we want to see which animals we've sampled before. So whether it is not to take the same ones into account again when we work with mammals, for instance, at the end of the study, you want to know how many mice you've caught from how many species. So you don't want to count specimens more than once as a new individual. It's only once a new individual. But we also want to mark them because we want to study them, whether it's for behavioral studies, density studies, reproductive, to see how they react to specific environmental cues. It's very important. So whether it's a small mammal or a or a larger mammal, it basically stays the same. Of course, it's easier to capture and to handle small mammals than larger mammals, and that is in my favor, of course. Then also to explore applications in ecological research and environmental monitoring. At this point, I can just mention that the thing that actually led to my current research focus, well, over the past 25 years at least, was doing environmental assessments where you work with a team of specialists in this big environmental studies, monitoring studies. I've been involved, well, yeah, also the elephant marshes in Malawi, in Eswatini, then with the Lesotho Islands Water Scheme. I've been involved a lot for more than 20 years. I've worked there. And what I've learned from the other specialists and seen from their results is that small mammals are actually very good indicators of what's going on the system, and especially as often during environmental assessment studies, you're doing rapid assessments. So for rapid assessments, small mammals is good indicators, and a little bit more about that. to illustrate the underlying principles, ethical considerations, and methodologies related to this work, and especially the marking uh, measure that you're going to apply in your study. And then I want to refer to 2 case studies to exemplify the research and conservation value of effective mark recapture release techniques by focusing on small mammals, mice, shrews, and sengis. So first of all, an overview. Toe clipping. When I was a student in the late 1980s and early 1990s, toe clipping was still allowed. You see the rodent there, it's got 5 toes and 5 fingers, if you can know that. 4 toes on the hand. So by clipping different combinations of the first digits of the different fingers or toes, you could actually uniquely mark almost up to 1,000 individuals. So it worked very well at the time. Today we know that actually you're influencing the behavior of that animal. You put it under unnecessary stress, and there's much better ways of doing it, especially now with digitization. Your computer or a reader can get all the information for you onto your computer immediately, and so on. So a second one is ear clipping. Um, Many of you may know that some farmers still do it with their cattle. They also use that at some stage for some other mammals, especially small carnivores. Mice not so much, because once an ear is clipped, it easily tear, of course. So this is also not readily allowed in ethical committees. And when you cannot get ethical clearing on it, that also means that many of the journals, the research journals, won't publish your work. So when you decide on which method of to mark to capture, or to mark and to recapture your specimens is very important, because you have to bear in mind that the research without publishing it, without publishing your results, does not really make a contribution, because then it just stays with you. Other things, radio and satellite collars. Yeah, we've, especially radio collars, we've used that on small mammals, on mice as well, for instance, striped mouse. So you can see how they move, when they're active, with which other individuals do they relate, etc. What is the different behavior over different seasons? Satellite collars, of course, you do get them now for mice, but they're still very expensive. And of course, satellite collars also ask for more battery power. So it's very difficult to have a little sun panel on a satellite collar on a small rodent that weighs between, well, the pygmy mouse, more or less 4 to 5 grams. And then you get some of this, uh, your, uh, yeah, sorry, you get some of this in the fly rats that goes up to 160 grams. So big difference. Okay, then this is something long-term coloring markings. I just want to go back. I think I skipped one. No, I didn't. So there's another way that we used many years ago, and they're still using that because it's much cheaper. It's to mark the tail of the different individuals that you're working on in a different pattern with different colors, some higher up in the tail, some lower down, and so on. So that's one way as well. But of course, it just increase your, uh, your yeah, the technical things a lot. You have to really keep book, and you must go page back and forth in your book to see which individual you actually work with. Pit tags is wonderful. That's fantastic. In the next slide, I'll explain to you exactly what you can do with pit tags. But pit tag is basically something that you insert. They also insert this in rhino horns, in elephant tusks, and you can pick it up with a reader. And every pit tag has got a specific number. It's a very long number. But with the computers today, it can throw it out and say, well, this is one that you've already checked. And the first time you checked it, it was a male mouse. It was scrotal. It had a foot length of 32 millimeters, a tail of so long. Its weight was, say, 26 grams, and so on. So immediately when you recapture it, you can see what has changed, what is different. And then also with pit tags, because you don't have to handle the rodent again. Once it is got the chip, and there's something, it's a little bit smaller than a rice, a grain of rice, and you insert it with a needle and a syringe under the skin at the neck, behind the shoulders, at the back. It doesn't bother the animal once you've released it. And next time you trap it, you don't even have to open the trap. You can just, when the trap is closed, you go with a reader over it, over the trap, and you can immediately see what individual have you caught. Fur clipping is something else, and this is what we normally do. That little red arrow shows to a shoulder clip. So we just cut some of the hair. It grows back within 2-3 weeks. It will grow back completely. But this is a way in which you don't harm the animal. It's not permanent. The hair grows back, but you cannot see that you've handled the specific animal, what was the measurements and so on, but you can see that you have handled it. So in other words, you won't take all the measurements and all the data of the same individual. You basically handle it as a recapture. So when you're interested in how many specimens you've trapped, then you can work out, because then you don't calculate the recaptures into the system. Right. For instance, say we want to do mark, recapture, release, mark, trap, or trap, mark, release, and recapture. And we go to this trapping grid. Now, all the dots that you see there is different traps. They're spaced 10 meters apart. They in rows and columns. You can basically say, so you can say that, for instance, this is trap 1A, this is strap 8A, this is strap, for instance, strap C3, and so on. So you can indicate. So once you know which specific individual you've trapped, you can actually see on this grid where have that animal been trapped during the past week. So you can actually estimate a home range area for that individual. You can also get an idea of how does the specimens relate to each other. How, when did they start activity? When were they not active? Their reproductive state. And especially when you have pit tags, then the next month you can see the same individuals that you trapped. The females are pregnant again, or they again lactating, or they stopped reproduction completely. So there's so much information that you can get from pit tags, for instance, in a grid system like that. So with color markings, you can do the same, because there you can also identify the same individual. So you can know in which traps it has been caught and at what stage. Pit tags I just now dealt with. With fur clipping, well, but then you must just know that you won't know if you come back next month to the same grid, that hair would have grown back. And also, as I mentioned, you won't be able to distinguish between specific individuals. You will just be able to say that I've handled this mouse before. But with our monitoring studies, where we're basically interested in how many species have been caught, how many individuals of each species has been caught, because that gives you information about the community and the community structure. And that is actually what we're interested in, as you'll see within the next two slides. Radio or satellite collars. yeah, there you actually don't need a grid because you can find the individual. Just to give you an indication, a Sengi or an elephant shrew, it's got a home range of about 300 by 300 meters. The striped mouse, it's got a home range of about 30 by 30 meters. This is just to give you an idea. When you radio track them, you can actually follow them and you can take the real GPS locality. With satellite collars, um, of course, the satellite tells you exactly. It gives you the GPS localities. Uh, uh, yeah. So the satellite sends that information, or it picks it up from the collar around the animal's neck, and it collects a lot of data and then send it in batches to your computer. So the good thing about it is that you don't miss information, although there may be mistakes or a battery may run flat. The bad thing is that you don't get to spend so much time in the field as you would have loved to. For me, I'm passionate about walking in the field. I've just had an accident, so it makes it a bit difficult for me, but at least I think I'll be back in the field soon. Right. Monitoring small mammals. We at the museum, we work as a team. It's me and Sadisu and Ronnie. Um, and yeah, you need somebody to write. You need somebody to help with the traps, putting in bait. You need one person to take the measurements and everything so that, especially when it comes to rulers, that another person doesn't take the measurements in a different way. So, so why do we monitor them? Of course, that's very important because if you just want to look at community structure and which species you find, then it's not a big issue. As I said, then you can do just the hair clipping. If you need more information over a long time period, then the pit tags is the answer for you. Um, if you need still more information on larger animals that cover much larger areas, then radio collar, uh, and especially satellite collars, because that allows you to track them. I mean, to track a lion or elephants and so on, it's very expensive. In some cases, some areas, you really need an aeroplane to fly you to get all the coordinates. Uh, with your, if you want to, and if your battery holds, you can get a reading from satellite collar every second if you want it that way. Um, while if you do radio tracking, where you have to follow the animal on foot or with an aeroplane or with a 4x4 in the field, um, it's not possible to get so much information. And then also how and when do we monitor them impacts on the method that you will allow. So we use fur clipping because we're only interested in the species composition. Our sampling, especially this picture is taken in a Kalahari in a green year, um, is we sample it over a 7-day period, and during that time the hair is not grown back. So it's a very easy and a cheap method of doing it. So, okay, trap, mark, release. What kind of trap do we use? Of course, you cannot use snap traps because then the animal is dead and you want to study it over a longer time period. So what we use um, is similar to the Sherman traps. It's got the same volume inside, but we make it ourselves because a Sherman trap, if you import it from America, okay, it's metal. It gets very hot in summer, very cold in winter. Uh, and when you take everything into account, it can really be very close to 1,000 rand per trap, per Sherman trap. We get it made here locally, and we're also involved with this. Is for under 200 rand a trap. You get something that's handles the climate better. It's better for the small mammal individual. Of course, yeah. We put in cotton wool, a little ball of cotton wool as well. And then we also see that there's always enough baiting. So we regularly check the traps. You have to do it according to your ethical promise you've made. to get the ethical clearance for your project. So, okay. But how do we put out our traps? Do we put it out in a transit, like on the left, or do we put it out in a grid, like on the right? So here's an indication. It's the same number of traps in both these pictures. The traps are spaced 10 meters apart. Why we prefer the boundary, the transect, is that you can actually, with the same number of traps, cover a much larger area. Remember, we want to sample a large area because we want to sample all the species in that specific area. So here you can see with this 110-meter transect and a boundary strip of 10 meters, the area that you cover is more or less 20,000 square meters, while with the grid, you only cover about 12,000 square meters. Yeah. If your boundary strip is wider, 20 meters, then your total area with the transect increased to 41,000 square meters, while only 17,000 square meters with the grid system. Of course, when you want to trap specific individuals and get an idea of their home range size and how they relate to each other, then of course the grid system will be the preferred and not the transect system. Right, it's very important to know your study animals and to know when is the best time to sample them, to trap them. So here you see in red the breeding cycle of mice in central South Africa, where we have cold, dry winters, and then also our summers can be extremely hot, and most rain is in summer. So what happens? You can see that the breeding cycle. Sorry, I keep on pushing the wrong button. The breeding cycle relates to the grass productivity, uh, as just shown, been shared with you with Makita. The mammals depend on the vegetation, on the grass, and here you can see that reproduction only starts in August. It starts to lift off when the first primary productivity of grass increase. Remember, this is grassland biome. This Southern African grassland biome, and it peaks in March, and after April, it completely decreases. After April, there's no more primary productivity. So, what does this entail for the small mammals? Well, they need energy during winter, and there's no food. So there's no breeding during this period from about middle May till well, at least August, early August. There's no breeding activity taking place, and then it's exponential growth because it starts with females. And the gestation period is between 19 days and more or less 24, 25 days for the different species. So you can just imagine once a new litter is born, they suckle for about a week. And then after another 19 or 20 days, the daughters can also contribute toward the breeding and the increase and so on. So it's mothers and their daughters and their daughters and their daughters, and it increase up till the end of April. So as we've seen with the vegetation, after April, there's no more primary productivity. It also starts to get very cold. The animals need energy. And this is when the period when between 40 and 60% of the animals die off. All the young individuals die because they're not, they cannot compete during the winter with healthy individuals for food, social stress has got an impact on them. So every year, between 40 and 60% of the individuals die off. The very young and the very old, of course, first. We know that because when you trap in August, September, you cannot find any old individuals anymore, really old, and there's no young ones in the traps. It takes a while before you get your first uh, um, young individuals of the first litter in the traps. So this is something that, but now, so where do we sample? Um, we sample right there, right at the drop-off. The reason for that is there's a lot of individuals and they're all looking for food. So even your trap shy individuals, your trap shy species that you normally only trap after about 4 or 5 nights, you can get in the trap during that time. So we do our monitoring studies uh, almost only during this time of the year now. Getting to techniques, what animals are we looking at? We're looking at mice, which of course is a rodent. It's grass, although they also take invertebrates like earthworms and so on. Shrews is a carnivore. They strict insectivores. It's the one at the bottom there, bottom left. And then the Sengis, elephant shrews, they were used to be called elephant shrews, but that's confusing because a shrew is an insectivore, it's a carnivore. So Sengis are actually omnivores because they eat both vegetation and insects. Um, this is one of the main reasons why we work on these three groups, but maybe the most important thing is that we can catch all individuals within the taxa in the same kind of trap, and they do enter the traps. So we don't have to use different kinds of traps to trap different individuals. One very important role that these small mammals play, of course, in the ecosystem, of course, they are the main prey of many of the raptors, the smaller predators, carnivores, many of the reptiles, snakes, and so on. But that's nothing in compared to what I'm going to show you now. Here we have just a very simple indication of an ecosystem where you have your primary producers, your vegetation, the primary users, which is a level on which the mice will fall. And then also the secondary users, which is the shrews, and then also the shengis. So they play a very important role. The primary users have got the impact on the primary users, the impact on the primary producers is that they act as pollinators, they distribute seed, they fertilize soil, they growth stimulators. Um, between the two user levels, small mammals are prey for many predators, as I've mentioned, important prey, but they also predate on invertebrates. Um, and then when you between the two levels, two user levels, the main prey, they are a main prey item for most of the smaller to medium-sized predators. They're also ecosystem engineers. And you can just think, if you haven't heard about this term before, just think about an aardvark, an ant bear, and its role that it plays in the very dry, very hot Karoo or Kalahari desert. If it were not for them and the burrows that they dug deep under the soil, there's a lot of other organisms that wouldn't have survived in that specific area. So it's so important that some of the flies are only associated with aardvark and aardvark burrows, and they move on the back of an aardvark from the one area, from the one aardvark hole, or large ones are even called aardvark hotels, to the next one. So the small mammals also act as ecosystem engineers in this way and actually allow organisms to survive in a specific area. Without them, this would not have been possible. When you look at the density of these animals, more than 300 per hectare. So this is more or less taken average count in the middle of the breeding season. So this is not at the end of autumn, early winter. So this is a lot of food that's available, but also they eat whether it's vegetation, whether they distribute seed, whether they pollinate, etc. Got a very important role to play. And so much more if you think that these three taxa, mice, shrews, and sengis, make out about 30% of all mammal species in any specific area, whether it's in the Bloemfontein, the Free State, South Africa, Southern Africa, or Africa. This is more or less a percentage that they contribute to the number of individuals, to the number of species, mammal species. Biomass, that 300 per hectare relates more or less to 7.5 kilograms per hectare. That's a biomass of prey available for others, and that's also a measurement taken for the middle of the breeding season. But very important, important indicators of disturbances on which grass or vegetation do not react. Yeah, Nikita, and I think you will enjoy this. I hope you appreciate this as well of small mammals. For instance, if you work in a conservancy and you sample small mammals, uh, you look at the vegetation. Remember, we relate our work. I work closely with a plant ecologist and also with entomologists. So I relate our work and our habitats that we sample with what the ecological integrity value that the plant botanist gives me. Sometimes you see this is this beautiful climax vegetation, but the small mammals are just not there. You don't get your specialist species, there are very few species available, and so on. And then you start to realize, but hey, there's stray dogs running around, there's a lot of snares, there's illegal hunting going on. We've worked, for instance, in the Army training base just outside Bloemfontein, where there's a lot of compaction of the ground. There's noise with this big tanks and army vehicles moving around. All of that has an impact on the small mammals, but not an immediate impact on the vegetation or on the insects. So small mammal numbers and species composition are closely related to and react quickly on changes in rainfall or drought, on vegetation. How does the vegetation react to something, to other animal species and the composition of that species? For instance, where you have exotic species, mammal species in a specific area, the small mammals will pick it up. Where you have the composition of your carnivore taxa, your composition of them, for instance, has changed. Some species is missing. Your small mammals show it to you. So yeah, they also react to anthropogenic disturbances, of course. They do react to fire, to overgrazing, many of this human-induced disturbances do they react. So they're excellent indicators of environmental condition and habitat integrity, and that is why all the big environmental assessments do include small mammal studies, because it tells you something different that the vegetation does not tell you. Okay, following the results of 25 years of research in the grassland biome, we got to the following conclusion, and this has become our hypothesis, that species richness increase, the number of species increase with ecological integrity value, or with primary productivity in general. So it increased up to a point of climax, and then it started to decrease again. So this means that also the diversity indices increase, but this means that new species must enter this curve as the ecological integrity of a specific area increase. And then in post-climax, of course, they must exit again. So, but not all species that enter early on in this curve remains. For instance, the white-tailed rat is an endangered species, only endangered mouse species that we've got in the Free State are found at low ecological integrity. As soon as it's similar to what happens with vegetation. As soon as there's a certain structure or cover or then things change and other species enter, which is actually competition for some of the species, and the species leave, for instance. So we cannot say that the white-tailed rat is endangered because there are no pristine habitats anymore. It's exactly the opposite. You know, we've worked in the cradle of humankind, and the only place where we found white-tailed rat was in the burn plots on the edges of the. So they move from one place to another to stay to a specific ecological integrity. Um, and this whole thing just tells you that, Nakita, for instance, the vegetation is adapted to fire in the in central South Africa with lightning. And when I look at this, at the small mammal information, it seems like the small mammals has also adapted to this, to the same. They show the same reaction that the plants do, and they react to fire, which is very important. So all these species that you find at the different areas on this curve are termed indicator species. And this is actually what we look for. Not only the number of species, but the indicator species are very important. And I'll show you now the generalist species with a wide habitat tolerance usually dominate very close to extreme disturbance or very low ecological integrity value, while the specialist species are found in their numbers increase close to climax condition. So when we what all of what I've described now is basically our hypothesis, and this is what we test when you work when you're doing your environmental assessment. This is actually what you work in. And remember now, you won't be able to do this work if you haven't done mark release studies. So marking the animals is critically important to do this kind of the studies that is of ecological and conservation importance. This is just to see how does it relate to vegetation. Exactly the same. The general species are called pioneer species. Uh, uh, the plants are called pioneer species. Then you get your different indicator species that enter at specific areas or is related to specific ecological integrity values, like your increaser 1, 2A, 2B, 2C, the subclimax species. Then you have your climax species, the vegetation, which is also termed decreaser species, where you have your specialist species in small mammals. So there's a very close relationship. But how does this hypothesis now hold for the dry, sandy savanna? And we've done work in the Kalahari on the one study that we've done is in the on the Gap Plateau, and the other one has been done at Tswalu Kalahari Reserve. Both of them are relatively long-term studies. With the first one on a mine on the Gap Plateau. It's an iron ore mine. We've sampled for 7 years that specific area until the project had to stop. On the other one, we're now in our 5th year, the one in the Kalahari, at Tswalu Kalahari. So the one that we've done the Gap Plateau is to look at changes in small mammal community structure following open cast mining in central South Africa. So please bear in mind that this work will not be possible if you cannot mark your specimen, because otherwise you will just keep on adding, and so won't really get you the results. So the identified problem areas resulting from open cast mining has been said to be soil removal, dust, noise and vibrations, dewatering, land management, etc. How does this affect small mammals? Are small mammals good indicators indeed of habitat disturbance? So what we've done, we've put out a lot of transects. There you can see the small transects. It's on Kolomela mine. It's got so it's K3, K4, K5, K6, K7, and these were put out close to dump sites, but also to the mining sites. They also put out, in line with the wind direction. There you can see the wind direction, the wind rose there on the top left, um, so that we can see what exactly, first of all, does the mining activities affect small mammals in these areas, and what exactly is it that do it? And to compare our results, we've got some. We've put out some transects also. There's Willehalspan, Pan, Groot Pan, Kappies Karee. It's all the farm names. So we've put out transects on them as well to make a comparison. What happens on the mine, and especially close to the dump sites, and what happened at the same time on the farm, because we wanted to know what is the changes due to climate or rainfall variables, or is it really because of the impact of the mine. So this is a very interesting study that we found. Each transect at 50 PVC traps. We spaced them 5 meters, so the total length of the transect was 495 meters. Um, and this is what we found. Right at the beginning, the first year, and we started, it was about a month after they started mining. Okay, they did their experiments and so on, but after they actually started mining, it's within the first 2 months. We already had the privilege to start with our trapping. We got 11 species just on the mine. And here they mentioned with the trap success and all the other information. Within 3 years, 5 of the original 8 species that were found on the mine was not present anymore. So only 3 species remained, and you just look at the red dots where they're not anymore, where they disappeared. You can see that there's some species that's only some of the areas only got 1 or 2 species left, where we started off with 8 on the mine. So. And this is how it went from 2011 to 2012. There was an enormous decrease in the number of individuals that you caught. We can also say the number of prey individuals that we've caught. The trap success has decreased considerably on the mine. That's one on the left. And this one unfortunately can't see the, yeah, there's something over here now. So while at the farms, this figure looks completely different, where you can see the minimum number alive. The one at the bottom left is species richness. So you can see how the species richness has decreased, the number of individuals has decreased, and you can see clear patterns on the mine. The first damage, or the worst damage, was done within the first 3 years, and after that, only the general species remained. No specialist species were found on the mine on our transects anymore. While on the farms, it was a completely different issue. This is just an indication. This is just to say, following the species composition on the different plots, this is how they relate to each other. And you can see 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 was very close to the mining site, not the dumping site. So dust was not a problem there, but compaction, vibrations, etc. was the same. 3 and 4 was the closest two sites to the dumping site. So dust have an impact, but also noise, vibration, compaction, and so on. 7 and 8 at the top were the conservation sites, which the miners put away to conserve. And that was indeed where most of the species were caught, a very healthy community composition. 5 and 6 were similar to 3 and 4, close to the dumping site, but further away. So let's just see how this changed. From the first year in 2011, this is what we got. Then Bismuthitoides, pygmy mouse were lost, Sarcostomus, it's a pouch mouse were lost from the system. And just see how this is changed. 9, 10, and 11, 12 still grouped together. And together with 7 and 8, which was conservation sites, they were furthest away and they were not in the dust fallout. So they were closer to the mining area and not the dump site, but didn't get the dust and so on. So they still grouped together. Remember that species were already lost, so they should getting closer and closer towards each other. 3 and 4, the site that was really close to the dump site, lost most of its species, almost all of its species. No specialist species, only general species, and the same with 5 and 6. So 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 were basically in the same line, with 5 and 6 further away from the dump site, so less dust. But eventually, as you'll see, the dust got to that area as well. Mismanactoides were lost at 5 and 6. Here, the more conservation area, some more of the specialist species were lost. And there you see how they. So, and we could follow this through all of the 7 years that we worked there. So this is just to mention that the species composition already tells you something. In conclusion, there's a clear negative change in small mammal community structure we observed on the mine, but not on the farms. The changes that we saw in the mine, the trap success decreased significantly, species richness decreased, indicator species associated with high integrity were the first to leave the habitats. The only species that still remained were generalist species. The Shenandoah divesti also decreased. But then it's also very important to see the way in which changes occurred at the different transects. Closer to the dust, they lost their species first, then and those further away from the dust last. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the computer to respond. Okay. So what we see is there in red, you can see that at the mine, there was really retrogression with the ecological index value that has decreased. Once again, I worked with a vegetation specialist, Professor Nico Smit. While on the farms, there was at times an increase in ecological index value, and the same, and the small mammals indicated the same. And then other times, depending on rainfall, whether it's good rainfall, whether it's early or late rainfall, that all had a big impact as well. So and then the second one, long-term monitoring. So with monitoring, you have to mark and release. Remember, you cannot just trap and let go or take out. So what is the value of long-term monitoring studies? Tswalu Kalahari Reserve. So we worked on 6 study plots, 2 on rocky koppies, 3 in sand dunes, 1 on clay soil, etc. Same number of traps, spaced the same way. We trapped for 7 days and 7-night period on all of the transects to make sure that we get all the species. So we started in 2021, the year after COVID. We would have started in 2020, but okay, we can only get. And then after extended period of drought, the area had very good rainfall, and you can see that the minimum number alive, the density, the number of specimens has increased, but then decreased further because there was still average or below rainfall, but the rainfall came late. In other words, your reproductive season started late. That had a big impact. And then from 2023, 24 and 25, you could see that there was a pioneer grass, Smithia kalahariensis, and we were afraid that, it's sour grass. Is the small mammals going to do their thing there? Are they going to breed? Are the species coming back? And here we saw that it has made the turn. In 25, everything increased except on the the Lekgaba dune site. Lekgaba is an area where they have lions. It's a 400,000 hectare area. It's got lions, and the others more or less 610,000 hectares does not have lions. So this is just to say that the different conservation areas or differently managed areas also respond differently to climate variables. Remember, this is a natural area. There's no hunting taking place, and so on. Yeah. Thank you, Salah. I'm almost done. The number of species has basically also decreased, but what happened, it's not only decreased, because now you see that a lot of your pioneer species, or the general species, are returning. So you don't see the neat pattern of decrease and then increase again. But when you look at the why, the species that you trap, that can explain why this is happening. And the same with your diversity, generally decreased and then started to lifting up. So yes, so this upholds the hypothesis, but it just confirms the same as in the grassland, is that you cannot just look at one, for instance, just diversity or just number of species richness. You must take this whole pattern into account, and you must really see which is the species that you have trapped indeed. So the study will continue, hopefully for at least another 5 years. The information is plugged back into the management plan of Tswalu. So that is valuable. And then when they make changes, they inform us as well. And that can help us to interpret our results of the next year. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a lot of questions for me.
Thank you so much, Nico. And I should say that was a really good presentation. I love the way animal welfare was taken into consideration and the way it connects to Nikita's talk and showing the whole dependence in the ecosystem. Yeah, that was really cool.
Thank you very much, Salah. I enjoyed very much. So I'll be here all the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.